Welcome to the studio at African Utility Week. I'm Rose Bundock and I'm joined now by Michael Liebreich, Chairman of the Advisory Board and founder of Bloomberg New Energy Finance. Welcome.
Hi there.
I wanted to ask you some quite macro questions about Africa and the potential that you see. It's been said that Africa has the potential and resources to become a world economic powerhouse. So what is standing in its way at the moment?
Well, it's a strange time to be asking a question about Africa becoming the world economic powerhouse, just because this is the commodity price crash, the oil price crash is obviously stressing a lot of African economies. A few years ago, it was probably people were probably being over optimistic. Africa at the time had 7 of the 10 fastest growing economies in the world, according to The Economist, and again that was probably to do with commodity prices being being over-egged, as it were. Yeah. But no, I'm enormously optimistic long term about the growth of Africa, of its economy, and so on. But it's going to be neither. It's going to be neither the sort of the over-egged, the over-optimistic vision from 3 years ago, nor is it going to be some of the doom and gloom that you hear because of the commodity price crash over the last 18 months.
So where are we going to see opportunity against these tough conditions?
So, I think that the commodity prices will sort of sort themselves out. They always do ultimately, and there'll be pain along the way. But fundamentally, I do believe that Africa is going to outgrow the rest of the world economy. I think that's just based on the progress that's made over the last decade, based on the opportunities, and you start to see, China growth is slowing. The government still says it's 7% growth. Personally, I'm sort of doubtful of that. You see growth picking up perhaps in India now, not what the Modi government wants to see, but it seems healthy enough. And I think also that Africa will, in some perverse ways, it will benefit from the fact that the Middle East is very unstable. So people looking for opportunities, Africa actually, much of it looks much more stable than some of the other parts of the world. And so I think that generates opportunities for adventurous investors. Don't forget that it's very difficult to find good investment opportunities now in the developed world. Europe is really finding it. Italy has had zero growth for I think it's 19 years now. Europe is growing at whatever it is overall, 0.5%, 1% if they're lucky, touching on 0%. So where do you go if you want either exciting growth or slightly higher yields than you can get from sovereign debt in the developed world? And there's a proportion of that can be found in Africa, even in the kind of difficult times.
Yeah. Which countries in particular are kind of standing out or on your investment radar?
So, it's funny, I didn't think this, but I've been hearing a lot about Botswana. A number of people that I met in the last day and a half that I've been here have been talking about Botswana. South Africa is also, it's just, it is, for all its it has a very sort of very active media, which can sometimes, of which you're part in this case, but it can sometimes really seem as though it lurches from this kind of fantastic success story to this sort of basket case to a success story. The fact is, it's Africa's biggest or second biggest, but it's a diversified, fairly advanced economy, lots of structural issues still to deal with, but it's a good economy. It's an economy you can do business in. So I'm bullish, I'm bullish South Africa. Morocco, in terms of clean energy, is incredibly ambitious projects, but also not just ambition. We're seeing the Ouarzazate solar project that's been delivered. You've got the wind projects at very low cost, sort of 3-cent wind, 4.5-cent solar. Goals of 42% by 2020, whatever it is, 52% renewable energy by 2030, I think that one is, going to host the next COP negotiation. So a very self-confident performance by Morocco. And where Morocco goes, then we see the rest of the sort of North African countries. Tunisia won't want to be there far behind. Egypt, there are projects, a little bit more help from the international community there. Up into the Arab world, Jordan, we see projects. Ethiopia projects, Kenya, Tanzania. So I suppose many countries doing interesting things. Zambia, I've been hearing about the last few days. People trying to trying to figure out Zambia for overseas investors. Yeah. Is that something for is that going to be an opportunity? So I think it's probably not it's probably you need to look at the individual opportunity and not so much the country, as it were, because that there's a lot of de-risking at the project and the opportunity level. It's not possible just to say here's a good country, here's a bad country. Not at all.
Nigeria, we haven't touched on that. What's your feelings?
Yeah, I mean Nigeria, before the oil price crash, before the sort of first half of 2014, it really looked very, very promising, because obviously the money was flowing in from the oil, and it was starting to address some of the governance issues that have always plagued Nigeria since I've been in business, and it seemed like some real momentum around putting a stop to flaring. I mean, flaring in Nigeria, Kande Yamkela, the founding head of Sustainable Energy for All, who's now he's still very active in energy, although he's working on his own political aspirations. But he was here today, and he was saying how it is unacceptable. He used this word very forcefully, unacceptable, and it is unacceptable to have such an abundance of natural resources, particularly in Nigeria, and just to be flaring it. There's no version of the future where natural gas is not going to be used in some way, shape or form. You can't just allow it to be flared and then also have very large proportion, the majority of your population not connected to the electricity grid and still cooking with traditional biofuels. I mean, unacceptable is really the word for it, I'm afraid.
You were also.
I have to be careful when I say that, because I come from London, and I don't want to fly around Africa saying what's acceptable and unacceptable. I'm quoting there Mr. Yamkela, who does have the right to say that. I want to be very clear though. It'll get me in trouble.
You're also part of that keynote opening address. What was your message for the audience?
Well, I actually harked back to the last time I spoke at an event in South Africa, which is now amazingly 5 years ago. To my shame, I've not been back in between. But I pulled out my old script, the transcript of what I said, and I stood up 5 years ago in Johannesburg at an energy ministerial, and I said, there were a few things that we needed to, a few misconceptions. One was that you either did clean energy or you worked on development. No, that you do energy and development is the same issue. That was one. But the other thing, I stood up 5 years ago and I said, renewable energy is not expensive. It's not just something for rich developed world countries, because wind is 6 cents per kilowatt hour, which is the same price as gas, as electricity from gas. And solar, people say it's expensive. Nonsense, it's 17 US cents per kilowatt hour. Well, now the world record projects are 3 cents per kilowatt hour for wind, and that's in Morocco, that's an African project, and 3 cents per kilowatt hour in Dubai for solar, not 17, not even half of 17, but 3 cents. So, I was sort of reinforcing that this extraordinary cost drop of renewable energy has powered on, and you know what, it's going to keep going. It's going to keep going.
That's fantastic. So just going back to South Africa, I mean, do you still, last year's theme, I think, was Africa is open for business. Do people still see South Africa as the gateway in your sort of experience and conversation?
I think they do, and I'm judging now, because I sort of follow the news out of Africa reasonably as closely as I can, given that I don't travel here as often as I should, as I've already said. But there was this whole thing, sort of that Nigeria's GDP was reevaluated, and it suddenly jumped by this enormous figure, and it was Nigeria is top economy in South Africa, and I suspect that a lot of that was technical adjustments, and probably very distorted also by their economy size is distorted by the amount of oil, of petroleum industry there. So I still see South Africa as being the largest economy in South Africa. Do you know what? I think that competition between two major economies, or between also East Africa, West Africa, between Southern Africa and between North Africa and so on. I'm a free markets guy, so minimum amount of regulation, but I like competition. Competition, I think, in many cases brings out the best in us. So if there's competition between different bits of Africa, to friendly competition and cooperation for regional power markets, for gas pipelines, for sharing or selling electricity cross-border, of course, as well. But competition focuses the mind and it accelerates projects. It helps politicians to kind of see what other countries are doing that works well. we do this thing called Climate Scope, which I also mentioned in my keynote, and it's a diagnostic for the investment attractiveness for clean energy of different countries. And it's really designed as a diagnostic. What are you doing well? Where could you improve? What would make a country more attractive for clean energy? By the way, African countries do really well. There's 3 of the top 10 countries in the developing world that we've assessed. Out of Asia, Latin America, and Africa, 3 of the top 10 are African. From memory, that's South Africa, Kenya, Uganda. But there are plenty of others in the top 20. And you could say, well, it's all about competition. South Africa did better than Kenya. Well, it kind of is, but it's also just a diagnostic.
Yeah.
But competition does focus everybody's minds. What can I say? I was a competitive athlete.
What's driven that success in Africa then? The success of solar, of wind, of kind of...
Well, I think 2 things stand out. Number one is that the experience curve, this idea that clean energy technologies get cheaper the more of them you build. So every time you double your installed base, the costs go down by a fairly predictable amount. And so that's what's driven solar from 17 cents 5 years ago to 3. Well, probably the median projects now, you could easily build solar, I'm sure, in many countries of Africa for 4, 5, 6 cents, 7 cents. There's no question.
Yeah.
The other thing, though, that's enabled that is the move to reverse auctions. So bringing price discovery back into the process, really forcing the providers to compete on price. Because previously, it was closed tenders. So somebody would offer to furnish a project, and the price would be agreed behind closed doors, and lo and behold, surprise, surprise, it was much higher than it probably needed to be.
Yeah.
Don't ask where all of that money went. That's another issue that has to be, has to be out there and discussed. The question of where and who is benefiting from each of these projects. So the closed tender process was inefficient. The feed-in tariff process, where energy ministries do lots of analysis, lots of work, and then say, this is the price that we're going to give everybody who bids, is also very inefficient. And I was making that point loud and clear for, frankly, quite a few years against the fans of the feed-in tariff. Feed-in tariff is just a state price. And we know it's inefficient. We know it, what it did to the Soviet Union. You know what happens when bureaucrats set prices. They tend to get them either too low, and then you can't buy the thing, whether it's toilet paper in Venezuela or electricity, clean electricity. And if they set it too high, then there's a big bubble, and everybody rocks up from all over the world, sells too much. It becomes a problem to integrate the electricity into the grid. And then when the government reacts and changes the price, those birds fly off again, having stripped the fields bare. So the reverse auctions deal with those problems. You get the right price discovery we call it, and then as long as the auction is structured correctly, as the ones in South Africa have been, the projects get built, the electricity gets delivered, and the developer gets paid only when the electricity is delivered, because the auction is for a price for electricity. It's not a price to build it and walk away whether it works or not. It's a price for electricity, but guaranteed for some period of years. And that has meant that these very cheap solar prices and wind prices are actually being delivered to consumers. And what's really important is in some cases, in many cases now, that's cheaper than the wholesale prices. If you look at it, Jordan, I don't know, it's sort of Middle East more than specifically Africa, but their wholesale electricity price is double what the wind projects can deliver electricity for. I mean, this is just fantastic. It's a win-win-win all round. It's a win for the environment. It's a win for the consumer. It's a win for the developer who gets good business. This is good business, and we're seeing that in the projects in Morocco. It's good business. South Africa, there's a bit of a kind of a wobble because. The projections of demand for energy. There was only a couple of years ago, there was the big furore about load shedding, how unacceptable. Here we are controlling our destiny, building our economy, integrating all of these, regions of the country that have not had power, and how dare we have load shedding? And so there was this enormous plan, Medupi and the Kisele, the other, and of course now they're probably not actually going to be needed. or not the full amount.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose.
So that's a bit of a wobble, to be honest.
Yeah. Does South Africa still need to prove itself? For the procurement plan, obviously, the program went very well in terms of opening up the market.
You mean the renewables?
Yes, the renewables. Yeah. But some of those projects are still.
South Africa doesn't have to prove itself.
Still to come online, I suppose.
Yeah. But I think there's a high degree of confidence that they will. The other thing that happens as you get more, as you start to get more penetration of renewable electricity into the grid, so you have to also invest in skills to manage that, because of course the wind blows when it wants to blow. You can predict it, you can forecast it, but it's not always there. And the sun obviously is only during the day, and then if you have if you've got weather changes quite rapidly, then it can be a little bit unpredictable. You have to invest in weather forecasting. You have to invest in the ability to provide backup. These things sound very difficult. Some people will tell you they're terribly difficult and renewable energy is impossible and we'll have blackouts. So I don't know, 12 years I've been doing this, I don't know of a single blackout anywhere in the world caused by the intermittency of renewable energy. I actually don't know of a single case. Even when there was an eclipse in Northern Europe recently, which cut the solar in Italy and Germany, and then suddenly it came back, and it was managed without really the grid operator breaking a sweat. Quite extraordinary. But you have to invest in that. But that's doable. Those are challenges you can meet. And meanwhile, when the penetration of solar into the grid is 0.5%, 1%, 2%, 3%, I mean, it really is not. It's sort of non-issue.
Thank you, Michael. That's all we've got time for.
Very good.
Thanks
Pleasure.
for joining us.